Sveicināti konferences trauksmes celšana nākamais līmenis dalībnieki un klausītāji. Esam atpakaļ pēc mūsu nelielā pārtraukuma un varam turpināt ar šodien jau 3. sesiju, kas būs veltīta visas sistēmas centram trauksmes cēlējiem. Šajā sesijā runātāji dalīsies ar pieredzi par to, ko nozīmē celt trauksmi, kā trauksmes cēlēju atbalstīt un kā panākt, ka trauksmes cēlējs ieviestajam mehānismam uzticas. Atgādinu, ka visas sesijas laikā arī jūs esat aicināti tajā aktīvi piedalīties. Vietnē Slido ierakstot savu jautājumu. Ieiet vietnē Slido, meklējiet trauksmes celšana un mūsu konferences sadaļā ievadiet sev vēlamo jautājumu. Pat ja nepaspēsim atbildēt sesiju laikā uz uzdotajiem jautājumiem, mēs radīsim veidu, kā attiecīgi atbildes iekļaut konferences ziņojumā. Un pirms dodu vārdu pirmajam šīs sesijas runātājam, lūkšu Ines Tauriņu īsti pastāstīt par Norvēģijas sniegto atbalstu trauksmes celšanas sistēmas stiprināšanai Latvijā. Lūdzu, Ines.
Paldies. Tūlīt mums būs iespēja iepazīties ar trauksmes cēlēju no Norvēģijas un viņu stāstu, kurš mūsu konferencē piedalās pateicoties Norvēģijas karalists vēstniecībai Latvijā. Norvēģija jau daudzus gadus atbalsta Latvijas centienus ieviest sekmīgu trauksmes celšanas regulējumu, un tādēļ ļaujiet man jums pievērst jūsu uzmanību 3 projektiem. Pirms 8 gadiem Sabiedrība par atklātību Dēlne īstenoja projektu vairāk atklātības un tiesiskuma labākai pārvaldībai, kad sekmējām trauksmes cēlēju modrību, un jau pirms 8 gadiem runājām par šo motivāciju ziņot gan par sliktu pārvaldību, gan korupciju, gan atklātības trūkumu, un sniedzām konsultācijas korupcijas upuriem. Pat novembrī Dēlne ir uzsākusi projektu godprātības un atklātības veicināšanu pašvaldībās un to sadarbībā ar uzņēmējiem. Tā ietveros pētīsim Latvijas un Norvēģijas pašvaldību atklātības līmeni, un nākamā gada rudenī aicinu sekot līdzi, būs indeksa pirmie rezultāti, kad jau varēsim iesaistīties diskusijā par to, cik tad atklāts ir pašvaldības Latvijā un Norvēģijā. Korupcijas novēršanas un apkarošanas birojas pat ir uzsācis ieviest projektu atbalsts trauksmes celšanas sistēmas izveidē Latvijā. Projekta ietvaros ir paredzēts īstenot vismaz 3 nozīmīgas aktivitātes, izveidot tiešsaistes ziņošanas platformu, organizēt 2 apjomīgas sociālās kampaņas un īstenot pasākumus knabu izmeklēšanas un analītiskās kapacitātes stiprināšanai. Šie visi projekti ir ļoti vērtīgi un nozīmīgi, lai veicinātu atklātību, trauksmes celšanu un arī vārdu brīvību Latvijā. Un vienu stāstu tātad par vārdu brīvību mums tūliņ izstāstīs arī Pērs Ingve Monsens. Tas stāsts ir unikāls mums Latvijā, jo mums tāda pieredze vienkārši vēl nav, taču šķiet varētu būt universāls tāds trauksmes cēlēju stāsts. Un jāatzīmē, ka Monsen kungs vēl turpina vēl joprojām cīnīties par labākiem apstākļiem trauksmes cēlējiem un arī vārdu brīvību Norvēģijā. Tādēļ aicinu uzmanīgi klausīties un izmantot iespēju uzdot jautājumus.
Jā, tātad, kā jau Inese minēja, mūsu šīs sesijas pirmais runātājs būs viens no zināmākajiem trauksmes cēlējiem Norvēģijā un ne tikai Pērs Ingve Monsens. Viņa stāsts par kurmes Siemens uzrunās ikvienu, aicinot padomāt, ko īsti nozīmē uzņemties celt trauksmi un kāpēc tas tiek darīts. Mr. Monsen, it is our great honor to have you here today. Please tell us your story and lessons learned. Please, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. My name is Per Ingve Monsen, and I am a whistleblower. I would like to thank you, first of all, for inviting me to tell my story as a whistleblower. And this is a story that started in 2001. And ended as late as in 2011. So it was a long run, as it often are in such cases. I usually advise people to quit their job and find something else before they even think about blowing the whistle on top management, regardless whatever whistleblowing protection you may think you have. The toll on your health and family is far too great. And whistleblowers, at least in this category, ends up with much of the same symptoms as soldiers at war, with PTSD, the so-called post-traumatic stress disorder. And many will not recover from it. I would like to say that for me to talk about this Siemens whistleblowing, it's still difficult, and I could get a bit emotional while I take this lesson. So bear over with me. Some information about me. Jeg må nesten ta det. Thank you. I'm a former project controller in the armed forces, and because of that, Siemens employed me as a division economist in January 2000. I got the financial supervising responsibility for all our hardware, software, sales to all of our customers, including the armed forces. And these days, I'm a consultant. I talk and write about whistleblowing and freedom of speech. And these are topics that I really care about, naturally, because of my own experiences. I have this blog, revelje.no, where I write about these topics every week. I am still married, and I say still because very often the strain whistleblowing inflicts on couples and families are too damaging. Enough for me. And here are some facts about Siemens. Globally, they are one of the biggest companies, and with 80 billion euros in revenue, approximately 350,000 employees. At the time I worked there, they were almost 500,000. They are represented in almost every country in the world, and they're also substantial in Norway, with €1 billion in revenue and 1,600 employees. Okay, exactly 1 year into my employment, Siemens won a major IT contract with the armed forces, which was to deliver a totally new IT structure to the entire armed forces with the estimated value of 1.5 billion Norwegian kroner. And as a result of a few years of bad numbers, the old management was replaced with a new one. The Germans wanted clean sheets along with the company's contract with the armed forces, and thus expected a major improvement in financial results. And it took only 1 year into the contract before I raised a serious concern about how we conducted our side of it. And I brought the matter up with a new CFO. And this could be seen as my first whistleblowing attempt. And it was based on the following documents. This document is an accounting overview, which in short shows that we have overcharged the armed forces with 18 millioner kroner in the first year alone. And I asked the CFO if the armed forces was aware of this. And he told me quite briskly, actually, that he would bring it forward and that I should not worry about it. Time passed on and I did not hear or see any changes. On the contrary, these illegal revenues kept on coming with additional millions. And later that year, the CFO ordered the sales manager to create a false calculus that show that we complied with the contract. And the sales manager, he came to me quite desperately because he didn't know what to do. And he knew that this was quite illegal. And we agreed that we now had to document that we were concerned about the development. And we wanted to make it clear that the responsibility for this lay with our top management. And therefore, we wrote a memo to them, which could be considered as the second whistleblowing attempt. And it went something like this. Here it says, regarding the estimated coverage level in the fish passes project, we would like to make senior management aware that the estimated coverage may be higher than agreed. We therefore ask the management to take the matter further with the armed forces. And now, with this memo, we have now made sure that the responsibility indisputably lay on the top management and not us, the middle managers down the ladder. In case there should be an audit or something even worse, as for example, a fraud investigation, which we really feared. Many years later, I received a copy of an email which the police had extracted from the Siemens mail system in their investigation. And this email was a comment on our memo and was sent from a senior manager to our CFO. And here it is. It says, this is not the answer to the task. The memo as it is written should be deleted, revoked ASAP. It must be given the status have never existed. A new memo must be created that provides answers to the task that shows that we have calculated 8% coverage. And that written comment indicates quite clearly that the top managers plan to keep the money. And so they did. Just a month later, much of these illegal funds were booked and transferred to other divisions in the company, divisions which actually had significant losses. But with these transfers, it suddenly looked like the management had turned everything around and made it all profitable. In the board's annual report, as you can see here, they wrote that as a result of increased focus on major and profitable projects, the result has increased by nearly 12 million kronor. It was, of course, all a lie, but for the Germans, it seemed extremely good. They didn't know what was going on in Norway. And as a consequence, the senior management received millions in bonuses. The fraud continued in the same fashion the following year. So in early January 2004, I realized that I could not be a part of this anymore. In the hope that someone would clean up, I sent an anonymous whistleblowing letter to the German leadership. And it looked like this. I tried to write it in such a way that my identity was not too easily exposed, as well as posting the whole thing from the city's main post office, far from where I actually live. But since I also brought forward financial reports, which only me and one other person were able to produce, I knew that I would be exposed if the Germans handed it all back to the Norwegian management. The days and weeks passed, I heard nothing, which was really annoying and stressing. But then suddenly, one morning in February, I received an email, and it was from the CEO, who wanted a meeting with all the managers in the company, and the same morning. He didn't say anything about the agenda. And I remember the sweat just poured out from my forehead as I read this. And I had a terrible feeling that this actually applied to my anonymous whistleblowing. The minutes felt like hours while I sat there and waited, because the meeting was scheduled to 11 o'clock. And this was a couple of hours before. But finally, 10 minutes to 11, I walked out of my office, but was immediately stopped by the division director, a giant of a man, more than 7 feet tall, who sat behind his desk and waved with his arm. And he was actually speaking on the phone until the meeting had already started. But eventually he came out. With shaky knees, I looked up at him while we stood in the elevator on our way to the top floor where the meeting should take place. And I remember I asked him if he knew anything about the agenda. But he just stared in the wall and didn't give me any answers. I can remember some mumbling. Now, my hands was shaking so badly that I had to hide them by put them in my pockets, not to reveal how nervous I was. And my courage had totally left me as we were about to enter the big meeting room. So I asked the director to go in first with the pretext that I had to pick up coffee further down the hall. I didn't really need the coffee, but I needed more time to build up some courage for what I feared was going to happen. And my hands were shaking on the huge conference table. The CEO and CFO sat together, and both of them looked at me with hatred in their eyes. And of course, then I knew the agenda for the meeting. I tried desperately to find an empty chair far from these two guys, and preferably behind a big colleague or two, but there was only one empty chair, and it was just next to the CEO. So I was forced to walk all the way around the table while I felt like everyone was looking at me. The silence was absurd. It was so quiet. I could even hear the weak scratching noise from my own pants as I stumbled towards that chair. And after what I felt like an eternity, I finally fell into it. And as I did, the CEO and CFO immediately stood up. The CEO threw my confidential report, which I had sent to the Germans, onto the table. And he stared at me at the same time while he screamed out just inches away from my face. We have a mole high up in the system. We have already found out that this report has been sent from Oslo main post office, but we are not stopping there. The mole will be found and fired. And I just disappeared into a cotton bubble of an anxiety over this totally unreal situation. And I tried to understand what just had happened. Siemens are registered at the NASDAQ stock exchange in New York, and in the US, you could actually face 10 years in prison for going after whistleblowers. But obviously, the Germans didn't care much about that. Then in the corner of my eye, I saw the CFO took the report away from the CEO and turned it around on his side on the desk and shouted that everyone should stand up and one by one go through this report just to find clues as to who was the mole. And I think it's a little bit blurry, but I think everybody except myself stood up, almost as if they were in a food queue while they waited for their turn to read my confidential report. I could hear someone accusing me, but I denied it over and over again, even though I knew that they knew. And in my cotton bubble world, I was just thinking about how to find a way out of this nightmare. The absurd meeting lasted maybe an hour or an hour or a half, but it felt like it never ended. And I was actually the last man out of this meeting. I staggered down to my office, but was then stopped by the division director, and he gestured me into his office and started the first of many following interrogations I was subjected to. Germans from different places all over Europe traveled to Norway with the sole purpose to find my comrades in crime. They thought others also were involved, and partly because the English in this report were too fluently to have had come from me. It's a bit funny to think about that, but in a way they were right. I wrote it in Norwegian, and my beautiful wife translated it into English. And that's that. Yeah, but I remember I went home early that day. I threw up in the toilet and had an exceedingly difficult time. I knew I was done, not only in Siemens, but this management would make sure that I would never get a similar job elsewhere either. And I had been so incredibly naive when I trusted the Germans. And because of that, I hadn't even gathered documentation that proved the allegations in the whistleblowing alert that I sent them. And I knew it wouldn't be long before they found a way to remove me. So therefore, I had to find as much evidence as possible and as quickly as possible if I wanted to fight them. And both me and my wife decided that I should. So that's why I forced myself to show up at work already the next day. And I must say that was one really tough decision to make. And it was incredibly scary to come back already, sits beside her. And they both stated that they would investigate and bring out the truth. A committee was established with lawyers and former police officers and so forth. And it took them a couple of months to conclude that Siemens had to repay an amount of 76 million kroner due to the overbilling of the armed forces. Siemens and the CEO, Per Otto Dyb, gave up and finally admitted to the overbilling. In consequence, he also had to withdraw the appeal against me. And thus I prevailed in this whistleblower case. And that, in hindsight, I can see it is extremely extraordinary. And it was with a great relief that I read Siemens' press release, which went like this. In retrospect, it is clear that we could have solved the conflict with Monsen in a better way. Monsen acted correctly and in line with the company guidelines. Yes. And with these words, I think I'll end my whistleblowing story. Thank you for listening. And now maybe, hopefully, we have some time left for questions if someone has something to ask.
Yes, thank you, Per Yngve. It was thrilling, all the things that you have been going through and are still going through. From your story, we really could feel what the challenge it is to be a whistleblower. We have also a question for you. Whistleblower is very lonely. And what is your advice for a potential whistleblower? How to prepare for that? Can you even be prepared for that? Please comment.
Yes, you can be prepared in some extent. I think one important thing is to find allies, that you are not blowing the whistle alone, that you have people within the company who goes along with you. That makes you stronger. But it also, yeah, I would. But as I said previously, it's better to do it after you have quit your job. Because when you are blowing the whistle and still work there, then it gets really difficult, and you are very vulnerable. So, but I would have done it again, but somewhat different, yes.
Thank you very much. Of course, we're still believing that we're still alive after the whistleblowing. And what are you doing today to promote whistleblowing and freedom of speech?
Yes, I talk about that, and I write about it in my blog. Regarding whistleblowing, I try to inform companies on how to handle whistleblowing in a correct way, and that they have good rules to handle it. That will help. That they also practice, actually. And I also speak with employees all around, and I give them advice on how to do this, and that they really have to do it proper and in the open and as honest as possible. But I must say that even in Norway, whistleblowing is facing hard times quite often.
Thank you very much for your support and advice. What support from a state whistleblower should receive, in your opinion?
I think the problem is not the politicians. They really want this because it's very cost effective to have whistleblowers for the society. But when when you are taking this a whistleblowing case to court, then you will find that there are somewhat different views in the court system, and it's incredibly difficult to battle the court system. They will very often rule against you and in line with employers, unfortunately. And that's something the politicians cannot really do much about.
Thank you. To conclude your presentation and question and answer session, what could be your call to leaders in institutions and companies, what to keep in mind and how to react to whistleblower?
I think that most of the time when you blow the whistle, for example, on environmental pollution that your company are doing, maybe non-intentional, then it's no problem. Everybody wants to make sure that this won't happen again, because the consequences could be very high. But if you are in a position to blow the whistle on the managers, then it's very difficult. You can't lean towards the internal rules and regulations, because the management will ignore them. And so you really have to watch what it is that you are blowing the whistle on, to consider whether it's a big risk that you will be exterminated, really, or not. I think that's what I can say about this.
Thank you again, Mr. Monsen. We hope that the leaders will hear you and understand that the whistleblowing is a benefit, not a threat for them. Again, thank you very much. Turpinot stāstus par trauksmes cēlējiem, uzklausīsim arī to atbalstītājus. Nākamais runātājs Martins Laine ir godalgots Igaunijas Express Media pētnieciskais žurnālists. Pērn par Tallinas Tehnoloģiju universitātes trauksmes celšanas skandālu atspoguļošanu viņš saņēma Igaunijas pretkorupcijas gada balvu. Hello, Martin. Thank you very much for joining us today and offering to share your experience with us. We're ready for it, so please, the screen is yours.
Hello. As you heard, my name is Martin Laine. I'm an investigative reporter in Estonia, in Express Media investigative board. We do different stories for different newspapers. So it's this really experimental way of doing investigative reporting and I think that Latvians know the best Delfi newspaper, but I'm not here today to speak about my current position. I was working in a different newspaper about a year back called Postimees. And this was a story in my professional career that was one of the most difficult and emotional times. I felt this caused me a lot of restless nights, and I remember one time I even cried about this case because it felt so hopeless. And as we heard from the previous performer, that these whistleblower stories could go in that way. But let's start. So last spring, this young scientist, Keegan McBride, came to our newsroom, and he gave us this testimony that was one of the most clear testimonies I've ever heard as a journalist, because he had payslips, documents, emails, Skype conversations, recordings to prove what he was saying. And I'm not here today to speak a lot about what he was saying. I'm here today to speak about what he was going through before we met and after we reported on the story. So as I was saying, this was a really emotional time for me, but for the whistleblower, I think it was even more emotional and even more difficult. And soon we'll hear why. So basically, he was saying that scientists are being paid with EU grant money, and there are a lot of scientists who are getting those grants that haven't contributed intellectually to those projects at all. This is like public secret in terms of universities, and as a journalist, the best stories to do are those stories that everyone knows but are not able to prove. So Keegan McBride gave us the opportunity to prove something that everyone has known but wasn't able to prove. So yes, but I have to say that Keegan McBride didn't come to us. We weren't the first or the second or the third party he came with his problems he was having. He felt almost like a victim, because he was forced to be communicating these things that he felt was wrong. He was in these email conversations, he was in these Skype conversations where they were discussing how they will use these funds and how they are reporting these funds. He felt that he was participating in it, and if he wasn't, he felt that if he will not speak out, he is as guilty as everyone in this case. So I've never met a whistleblower or even a source who is able to communicate so well why he was doing all this. So but I think his story, how we got into media, how this became a scandal, is really a good story for organizations to see what not to do with the whistleblower testimony. So before we met with Keegan McBride, he tried everything. Firstly, he tried to speak with his colleagues, and colleagues never denied that this was a problem for them, but they felt powerless, because as a PhD student, especially as a foreign student, Keegan McBride was from the US, and as a foreign student, you feel powerless, and you feel that your life depends on the organizations you are currently working at or studying in. So it was quite a logical reaction by his colleagues that, yes, we know that this seems wrong. I don't understand it, but what can we do? So Keegan McBride went to someone who could do something. It was his project manager. And this quote right here was after he called this way of handling things fraud. And he was told that, yeah, we have to do this flexible approach because in a mid to long term, it will come to more Western terms here. So it was never denied that this was fraud. They never denied it. Even the director of the department Keegan McBride was studying in admitted that, yes, this is basically fraud, but we need this money to keep us working. So at these three first stages, there was never anyone who was denying that what they were doing was wrong, but none of them were also trying to fix it, or they were never trying to find solutions to it. They were just justifying it. So it's not crazy to think that our whistleblower didn't agree with all that. So he went on. He went to the HR department and he said the same things, that he felt that they were defrauding the European Union when they were paying scientists who weren't working on the projects. This time even HR department employee didn't say that, yeah, you're wrong, that this isn't like this at all. She was saying as well that, yeah, this is serious. We need to speak to your department. We need to investigate this. But nothing happened. So McBride is a really, how do you say it? He was not letting it slip like that. So he went to the rector of the university, the most important person in the university. And what happened in the meeting, rector said that, yes, what you are describing could be fraud. So let's look into it. So Keegan McBride at that time thought that this is the solution, that the most important guy in the whole university said that, yes, we are investigating it. But months went by and nothing happened. He never got information from the university that his testimony is being taken seriously. He never heard anything about investigations happening. And when he tried to contact the rector of the university, there was silence, radio silence completely. So he went to the police. The thing with police is that they are not good at communicating what they are doing as well. So he went to the police, he gave his testimony, but he never heard back from them as well. So this was really confusing for him. And again, some time went past and nothing had happened. So he felt part of this defrauding scheme, and he was forced to defraud the EU, basically, with all the other scientists. We reported on it. We made a story, and it was actually, my date here is wrong. It was in August 2019. We made this story. We broke the story in Postimees. And it was a huge scandal, of course. There was a huge backlash. And there was a lot of people was talking about it. There were many comments from all of the science field in Estonia. Basically, it was a huge scandal. So what happened next? This is a picture from a press conference, and I remember clearly how I was attending that and leaving from the press conference angry and frustrated. And I can't imagine what the whistleblower felt. They were blatantly, from day one, they were basically denying the possibility that there was any fraud, although they didn't have the details even then. But they promised to start investigating. They formed this committee of investigation, and I hope that maybe they will find something. But as I've have this headline right here, you can already assume that what happened. So few months passed, and they found nothing they found violations of university rules, whatever that means, and but they found no evidence of fraud. So even them found problems with the project. But as I told you, I'm not here to speak about possible fraud itself. I'm here to speak about how they were starting to communicate with the whistleblower at this moment. So I'm using this word retaliation, which is a strong word, because what happened was the whistleblower changed the department, so he moved to another department. And what happened next was this employee of data protection or something came to the whistleblower's superiors and started warning them that this whistleblower shouldn't not be given any information. He should be, basically, he was asking the superiors of the whistleblower to not give him information, which for me is retaliation. And why I'm using this word so strongly is as well, our law doesn't have any whistleblower. Basically, there is no protection whatsoever for our whistleblowers in Estonian law. There are some points in Corruption Act, but this is a very specific thing that didn't apply here, in my opinion. So there's no such concept as retaliation in basically in our law. So it's not difficult to use this word. So in my opinion, it's really wrong that you start basically use this different sort of handling of the whistleblower, of your employee, after he has indicated that you are defrauding basically the EU. So they were handling him different. They were basically retaliating him. But this was just a start. It became public. So what happened next? After they had this internal investigation, they started to send out these press releases, basically publicly shaming the whistleblower. So there's this sentence that Keegan McBride's conduct cannot be regarded as merely good faith and in accordance with his duty of loyalty in the employment law. So basically, this is almost a threat of basically firing him, because when you don't act in accordance to your loyalty to your employment law, you are getting fired. So this was basically a public threat, in my opinion. Of course, people can argue. So he was starting to get scary private emails that he shouldn't give public comments anymore, because basically he felt that as a threat as well. So he even came out after that he felt that he was being threatened. And I got some emails as well. Even right at this moment, giving this presentation, I don't know what will happen next, if I will get some more emails from some lawyers threatening to hold me personally accountable for all this reporting I've done on this thing. But yeah, this was the difficult time. It was difficult for a whistleblower. It was difficult for me personally. It was really emotional. But then some things started to change. The narrative started to crumble. So there were many things that started to happen that were positive, and that made the whistleblower's testimony so valuable. So firstly, basically a criminal investigation by Estonian prosecution was started. Possible benefit fraud, under the possible benefit fraud law in the Criminal Act. Of course, this investigation is still ongoing, searching of the projects in TalTech and serious risk of mismanaged funds in TalTech, which made, in my opinion, the whistleblower testimony was already justified in that moment, that he was reporting problems in the university, and the ministry found those problems in the university. But this all I described previously was still going on at that time when that audit was released. And when I reported on the audit, I got some letters from lawyers as well. There was this one employee in the department that admitted forging evidence, signatures to prosecution to get away from criminal charges. So this is the latest development in that criminal case we know of. And this is also a really huge sign that the whistleblower testimony was actually justified. And the European Commission started some investigations. I can't know if it's Olaf or REA, the European Commission, these investigating offices. But we know that they are current. Some of them, there's some investigation going on in European Commission about this department. Later, rector of the university didn't get re-elected. I think that this scandal had a big part in that. And we as journalists got Anti-Corruption Action of the Year award from Transparency International Estonia. And we didn't get it because of the initial reporting. We got it because how we reported the retaliation issues with the whistleblower, because there's no law to protect the whistleblower. So we had, as a journalist, we had to protect him ourselves. And as you noticed, he was giving these testimonies with his own name and his own image. And I think in that case, it was really important, because I've had people being fired after they've given me testimony without their name. So it's actually easier for journalists to protect someone when they're a public figure. And I think that Keegan McBride is a public figure in Estonia. At that time, he at least was. So it was easier to make him a symbol, that it was easier to protect. So what are my conclusions? If the whistleblower doesn't get any information inside the organization, he for sure will go to seek solutions outside, to police, to media. I've seen cases in Estonia, for example. There was this huge sexual allegation case in the Estonian National Ballet and Opera House. And it was exactly the same. People were trying to find solutions inside the institution, inside the organization, but it went to media and it turned real ugly. But the other aspect of this was this real how this organization was never ready to admit its shortcomings. So the second conclusion, in my opinion, from this case is that if the organization is not ready to admit, then it's not really, there's no clear choices for the whistleblower. So those cases, it will go to media as well. So the problem will not go away if only more. And the last conclusion, this is only my opinion, that we don't have this law. And I think that if we had this law, would it be in any way different? Maybe not, because when an organization is corrupt and doesn't admit that anything is wrong, that the whistleblower was just lying, basically, then it's really difficult to protect him with laws, because the organization, I think, will not follow those laws. But I, of course, want Estonia currently is trying to, basically, their law is coming, and I'm, of course, greeting that, and I hope it will at least fix the culture in Estonia, where the whistleblowing is not really the first thing that anyone will try to do. In that case, the University of TalTech opened tip line, and I won't imagine anyone using that tip line if they don't trust the organization. So it starts from culture, and I hope that the law will support that culture. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for your presentation and for your job that you are doing to support the whistleblowing. Yes, we have some questions. As you already mentioned, Estonia has no special law regarding whistleblowing, but such a huge experience already and understanding of system. Could you please comment also on maybe which should be the competent authority in Estonia? What is your view regarding that? Yesterday in the conference we heard about Lithuanian prosecution model, we heard about Netherlands, about France. How you think, what is the best way for Estonia?
It's really difficult to say. It will go to the job inspectorate. So there are these things that they have to follow in job inspectorate. And as I said before, I think it will be a slow start for this law. I think that it will come to the practice, and we'll see if the law being implemented rightly, if the law will be implemented effectively. Maybe it won't work because the culture isn't there yet. So it's really early to say what is the best way for Estonia at the moment. I hope that the job inspectorate having problems themselves with whistleblowers. So it's really early culture of whistleblowing in Estonia.
Thank you. Let's hope you will find the best that fits for you. You also mentioned a lot about the need for culture, the need for understanding of it. And what is the public opinion about the whistleblowing in Estonia? Is it received as something good?
When we directly interpret whistleblower in Estonian, it's vilepuhuja, then it's automatically regarded as something wrong. And I think it comes from this Soviet times where this telling on others was really, really bad culture, really bad. It was immoral to tell on others. So we have a lot to develop in that terms, that maybe the previous generations are feeling some guilt in telling on others, and we need to, that's the culture we need to develop. And as you see, I'm a young journalist who was born in Estonian times after the Soviet occupation, and in my terms, telling on others, even from my childhood, was wrong. So I think it will just will be fixed with time, and it's not that bad. But I can see a lot of people, basically, even in our case, in that Keegan McBride's case, we could see people throwing some guilt on him because he was going against his own institution, and this is like treason for some people. So it's coming from Soviet times, and I think in that terms the culture should develop. But we are seeing, as these public huge developments have these huge scandals have broke out, how it's being seen.
How do you think, what would be the difference in the situation, in the process you are going through, if the student who submitted the report wouldn't be from a different country, but a resident?
With these international whistleblowing scandals, we see often that these whistleblowers are foreign. So there's some thing with that people from outside the culture are able to maybe see those things differently, and are able to fix or see those mistakes being made. And in one sense, it's easier to come from outside and stuff like that, but in another sense, it's really difficult because you have no safety net at all when you're a foreign student. So, but I think it's not a coincidence that in that case, that the person was from the US and felt that in his home country the things are usually different.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think that we will have a lot to talk and think about what you said today for us. Thank you very much again, and we will go on now with our third presentation on this session. Sāksim mūsu noslēdzošo stāstu šajā sesijā par to, kā panākt darbinieku uzticēšanos trauksmes celšanas mehānismam. Uzklausīsim Tomu Devainu, juridisko direktoru bezpeļņas organizācijā Government Accountability Project no Vašingtonas, kurš ir sniedzis atbalstu vairāk nekā 7,000 trauksmes cēlēju, vairāk nekā 50 reizes liecinājis ASV kongresā un vadījis kampaņas 34 nacionālo un starptautisko trauksmes celšanas likumu pieņemšanai. Toms ir arī profesors Kolumbijas apgabala juridiskajā augstskolā un sarakstījis vai bijis līdzautors daudzām grāmatām par trauksmes celšanu. Good afternoon, Mr. Devine, and please accept our gratitude that you find time to share your knowledge and experience with us today. Please, as already in this situation, the screen is yours. We cannot hear you. Could you please?
Oh,
yes, now it's okay. Thank you.
I'm a little bit unfamiliar with the system here, but I think it's my turn to start, and I'm very honored that you folks invited me to participate in your conference. I've been following the evolution of Latvia's whistleblower law for several years. I think it's a very exciting development. My topic this morning is boosting employee confidence in your whistleblower law. And I think the most significant thing to start that is to understand whose confidence you want to boost. Who are whistleblowers? What's moving them? And If we understand them better, we can help to work with them more effectively. There's no particular type of person who's a whistleblower. I've worked with over 7,000 in the last 40 years. And some of them are inspirational role models. Others of them are people who've been fighting with folks all their lives, and they finally found something to be self-righteous about. And most of them are neither. But all of them are people at the intersection of valid but competing values that we've all been raised with. For example, their own minds, don't think for themselves, look the other way, who don't want to get involved. In the United States, one of our worst tragedies and shames was when a woman was raped on the streets of New York City and everybody closed their windows. In fact, we say that see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. That's a monkey. It's not even a human being. But, you know, a tattletale, you're a rat. Well, it's a tough choice that whistleblowers find themselves in. Am I going to be a monkey or a rat? We very much cherish the right to privacy, and whistleblowing challenges the privacy of their targets. But in a democracy, we have to have the public's right to know. We have a choice there. The most difficult choice for whistleblowers is loyalty. Loyalty to whom? Your first loyalty we're all raised with is to support your families. That's why you don't bite the hand that feeds you. You may not be able to support those who depend on you. And you want to be loyal to your coworkers. They're your community. You may spend more time with them than your family. Your whistleblowing may threaten their jobs. But what about loyalty to your community? The neighbors whose children might be threatened by contaminated meat or poultry? Or what about loyalty to the law? You may be liable as a co-conspirator if you join the cover-up about something you're aware of. And what about loyalty to your country? Many of the whistleblowers I've worked with have been motivated because they knew that our troops weren't being killed by the enemy. They were being killed by corruption in U.S. defense contractors who put in shoddy parts. Well, whistleblowers have to choose between these. And so why did they choose to stick their necks out? Why did they choose to risk retaliation instead of playing it safe? Whether they're managers or maintenance workers, whether they're conservatives or liberals, I've found there's one common thing with whistleblowers, is they have to act on their knowledge to be true to themselves. If they don't, it'll be like a cancer eating at their souls. Regardless of what their motives were, they always wonder, what if I had acted on the information that I knew? And they are driven to follow through on their knowledge. And most of them are not doing this to be dissidents. Most of them, you know, there's a lot of people, we think of whistleblowing as filing allegations, and that's going to be connected with one of my recommendations. Most whistleblowers are just doing it to honor their identities, to be true to themselves. As they've said to me, you know, one said to me, I have to look myself in the mirror every day the rest of my life when I'm shaving. I want to be able to. Their professional lives are grounded in a set of values and principles, and they're being true to their calling and to their role in society by blowing the whistle. And that's why, as we'll see in the recommendations, a whistleblower law has to include what we call duty speech, protection for those who are communicating protected information, but not as a formal allegation, but rather as part of their responsibilities to do their job properly. Well, that's a little bit of background on who are whistleblowers. Why should organizational leaders, what can organizational leaders do to boost confidence in whistleblower systems? And the first thing is to produce results making a difference. Every survey of whistleblowers who chose to remain silent observers, the primary reason was that they didn't think it would make a difference. Most people are willing to risk retaliation. Most people are, they're courageous. They're willing to fight and die for their country. But there's got to be a point to it. So they have to know that if they stick their neck out, if they expose corruption or abuse of power, that it's going to have some impact. And so a track record of results for any organization is what's going to increase the flow of information to organizational leaders. And that's the second cornerstone, leadership. Leadership, not just in sending out a memo, but leadership in holding town meetings and speaking at them. Leadership in having an open door. Leadership in welcoming disclosures. Leadership in participating in the trainings. Leadership in terms of what I view as the best approach is non-financial reinforced commendations. Giving people speak up awards, corporate citizenship awards, letting the workplace, the environment, the people who are making up the culture of the organization to know that whistleblowing is welcomed. It's not perceived as a threat. It's perceived as a resource to contribute to the organization's mission. And that has to come from the top, and it comes through deeds, not just through a memo or a policy. The third thing is an internal system that puts the rules where the rhetoric is, like put your money where your mouth is. Put the actual structure and rules of the internal whistleblower channels to reflect the principles and ideals of the internal system. That means, and we'll go into it more in recommendations, but that means freedom from conflict of interest, adequate resources, training for the people staffing that whistleblower channel, a clear channel of communications to the top of the organization rather than being buried in the organization's bureaucracy. And then the fourth, of course, is results in achieving protection, results in canceling retaliation. If the internal system actually reverses some of the harassment that occurred on the more localized level of the organization, people will have more faith in the organization as a whole and say, well, this was just a problem with an individual, and I can trust the system here. That's sort of the four cornerstones of how to make a difference more effectively. Well, why should an organizational leader do this? On the corporate level, it's because it's good business. Most whistleblowers, when they make their reports or disclosures, they're not actually exercising the freedom to protest. They're exercising the freedom to warn, to prevent avoidable consequences that could be disastrous for the organization or its mission. And that means they are invaluable resource for organizational leaders. If they're not getting that flow of information and those warnings, they're not even going to know about things that threaten their institution until it's too late and they're being blamed for something they were blindsided for, that nobody gave them advance warning for. They need whistleblowers. I think of, it may be unpleasant to hear it, but I think of an organizational leader's approach to whistleblowers. It's like taking the bitter pill that keeps you out of the hospital. It may be unpleasant, there may be some side effects, but in the long run, organizational leaders who listen to whistleblowers, they're planning for the long run. They're being more farsighted, and their organizations are going to do better. But don't just take my word for it. There's been many studies on this. For example, PricewaterhouseCoopers did a global study about a little over a decade ago. That study found that there was a serious problem of fraud within corporations, people stealing from their employers, and that whistleblowers through anonymous hotlines were responsible to catch and expose and catch more fraud against the companies than internal compliance departments, audit departments, and law enforcement combined. This is the most valuable resource that an organization has. The International Association of Certified Fraud Auditors came out with identical findings about 3 years later. Last year, Professor Kyle Welch of George Washington University did a study of multinational corporations. The corporations, they had effective internal whistleblower channels systems. They had less actions by the government against them for enforcement. They had lower penalties when there were actions by the government. They had fewer lawsuits filed against them. And fourth, they settled them more quickly at much reduced rates compared to those who did not have whistleblower programs. Whistleblowers will help you make money in the long run. And it's not just in the corporate world either. It's in society. Whistleblowers, in my experience, have changed the course of history more than I'd ever dreamed of. Let me give you a few examples from US whistleblowers. Our False Claims Act, which Amit can speak from experience. He was a frontlines lawyer for it. It's America's most effective anti-corruption statute. In 1986, before we effectively deputized the whistleblowers, it was bringing in about $10 million a year in civil fraud recoveries for government contracts. It's its scope. Now, with deputizing the whistleblowers to file whistleblower lawsuits, it's bringing in over $1.5 billion per year on the average over the last 30 years. And it's getting better and better. It's been over $3 to $5 billion in most recent years. Whistleblowers work. But let's go to other things. Dangerous drugs, dangerous prescription drugs. Thanks to a whistleblower, we got the killer painkiller Vioxx pulled from the US market after it had killed 50,000 Americans with needless heart attacks. It would have kept killing them if it weren't for a whistleblower who got it stopped in 2007. Domestic surveillance. Mr. Snowden is exiled, but thanks to him and half a dozen pioneer whistleblowers who didn't leak classified information, we know that the US had a blanket illegal domestic surveillance program. And thanks to their courage, we got the USA Freedom Act that outlawed snooping on our citizens. Climate change. They ended the censorship of climate change in the United States government. Anti-terrorism. A whistleblower stopped a more ambitious rerun of 9/11. Robert McClain is his name, a federal air marshal, when the US Air Marshal Service was going to go AWOL, abandon its post during the Al-Qaeda attack. Thanks to him, they were not able to abandon their post and the attack was prevented. It was planned to be more ambitious than 9/11. Or military casualties. Thanks to corruption, our Pentagon, our Department of Defense, was not delivering vehicles that could defend troops against landmines in Afghanistan and in Iraq. That's where 60% of our casualties and 90% of our fatalities were occurring, was from landmines for our troops. Thanks to a whistleblower, the effective vehicles, they called them MRAPs, heavily armored vehicles, were freed up and delivered, and the casualties went from 60% to 5%. Or toxic incinerators. Toxic incinerators, we have incinerators burning industrial waste in our country that were near churches, schoolyards, in minority neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods. The company said that they were only burning safe materials. It turned out, thanks to a whistleblower, we learned that they were burning arsenic, lead, mercury, heavy metals, even dioxin, a substance that made Agent Orange in Vietnam and caused all the genetic mutations. Nuclear power plants that were accidents waiting to happen were stopped by whistleblowers when they were violating all the safety rules and could have been worse than Chernobyl. Human rights violations until a whistleblower intervened. US customs agents were regularly stopping people who entered our country and accusing them of drug smuggling without evidence. And if they didn't find that in their luggage, they would do body cavity searches, where you search inside all the sections of a person's body. And then if they didn't find them, they'd send them to the hospital for laboratory tests for up to 4 days. during which time they couldn't contact a lawyer, know the charges against them. It was like their bodies were properties of the US government. Thanks to a whistleblower, 4 days was shrunk to 2 hours before they get the normal rights of citizenship. COVID-19, whistleblowers cleaned up the airports in the United States, which were the major source of the initial wave in our country. But not anymore, thanks to whistleblowers who exposed that and got it cleaned up. Whistleblowers prevented us from mass distributing malaria drugs to all the people in New Jersey and New York. It cost Dr. Bright his job, but how many tens of thousands of lives did he save? Whistleblowers have stopped the US from deregulating, setting up corporate honor systems for meat and poultry inspection of government-approved food 6 times in our country. Or else we'd be liable to have a lot of E. coli and salmonella. Folks, I can keep going on, but whether it's the private sector or the public sector, whistleblowers, whether it's doing their jobs honestly or exposing abuses of power to the government, these are the people who change the course of history, and it's consistently for the better. I'd like to close just for a few minutes, having given a pep talk for the role of whistleblowers in society and what they need and why we need them. A little bit of an overview on Latvia's law. I've just been finishing a project with the International Bar Association to evaluate all the whistleblower laws in the world. All the national whistleblower laws in the world. There's 48 of them currently, and we've reviewed Latvia's laws as part of that process. And I'm pleased to say Latvia finished 7th out of 48 whistleblower laws in terms of the 20 best practice criteria that we assessed the laws for. I'd like to give you credit for some of the good things that were in that law, that are in your law, because they're impressive. It's got a very broad scope of protected speech. People can blow the whistle on what they need to. It's got a very wide scope of audiences, whether it's inside the organization or public freedom of expression. It's got provisions protecting the law against gag orders that would contradict it. This law is the supreme authority when there's a whistleblowing dispute. It's got, with the state chancery, very detailed institutional structure to turn these rights into reality. And that's what it takes, taking root within the government organizations. It's got excellent protection for identities. It's got a reverse burden of proof, which makes even rules of the game. Legal aid, so people can afford to act on their rights. Interim relief, so they can be functional while the cases may drag out for years. It shields whistleblowers against criminal and civil liability. That's better than the US law, which only covers an employment context. It has effective remedies to make people whole, not to be worse off if they win than before retaliation, if they win their case. That's 10 examples of very solid positive developments about your law. I would like to make quickly 6 recommendations, though, for how this can actually achieve best practices in global whistleblower rights. The first is you have to, I shouldn't say have to, I'd recommend that you protect all lawful communications of protected information. The law is structured that you don't have any rights unless you make a form particular procedures. Well, that's just not the way people behave naturally. And if you're going to only command, such as memoranda or dialogues with their supervisors, protest at meetings, and this would be illegal if we did this. What are the consequences we have to consider? That's essential, and it's my top disclosure. If you only protect the messenger, person who finally delivers the information, the whistleblower is going to be very isolated. And in our experience, isolation is fatal, both to survive professionally and to have an impact, to make a difference. Third thing that's very much needed is an enforcement structure. The law just says that it will be enforced through laws and regulations. You know, that's kind of a truism. Say that about any believe in. And finally, said at the very beginning of this talk, the whistleblowers have to be enfranchised in the corrective action. In Serbia's law, for example, they have to be allowed to participate in the investigation, to rebut the denials. Nobody confesses and when you investigate. Well, the whistleblowers know how to call those bluffs. They have to be part of the investigation. They should be allowed to comment on the reports of investigation or recommendations if they were adequate. This is the main motivator for whistleblowers to have faith in the system and be willing to risk retaliation. Folks, as I said before, I'm very honored that you invited me to participate in your program. I think Latvia's law is an exciting beachhead. It really needs a second generation to grow up, but it's giving you the resources to turn this right of whistleblowing into something that takes root in your society. And for that, you have my congratulations and my admiration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Devine, for your experience, for your knowledge and all the efforts you have shared regarding whistleblowing. We have a question from auditorium in Zoom chat. Mr. Amit Kabrawala, please. Amit?
Hi,
yeah.
Tom. Thanks very much for participating, and it's really good to see you and hear from you. I think you've made some really good recommendations. I will certainly work with our colleague.
Serbia, and it shows that there can be very effective partnerships between our country and those in the Balkans and Eastern Europe. And so I hope we keep doing that. Sometimes things at the top of our nations are beyond our control, but the public servants inside and outside our country's government are very excited to work with you.
Thank you very much for your support and cooperation. This conference also is all about how we can help each other to understand better and to implement better the protection of whistleblowers. We have also a questions for you, Mr. Devine. One very concrete and straight question: which country has the best whistleblowing law?
The one that I'm most impressed, the highest marks, 17 out of 20 best practice criteria. 16 out of, look, I think it was 16 out of 20. The U.S. also has that, but it's a little bit more advanced version of remarks I made on Latvia. So give government workers access to court to seek justice and enforce their rights. And those are pretty fundamental. So I think Australia's is better than ours. Tied with Australia, though, and it's a good motivation for you folks, is the EU directive. The EU directive in Australia, I think, set the pace for free speech rights for whistleblowers. And the EU directive is going to be your standard now. So it's a very high bar. And the recommendations that I shared are those that will get you up to the level of the EU directive.
Thank you very much for your answer. One additional question. In your opinion, you mentioned a lot of industries. Are there, and if yes, which are the industries in which the whistleblowing can make the largest impact? Military industry, healthcare, so on?
I don't know if it's the type of industry so much as the scope of the operations. The benefits of whistleblowing and the unfortunate retaliation and reactions to it, in my experience, have been pretty universal. One way to answer your question, though, that could be helpful is looking at the False Claims Act recoveries. Overwhelmingly, it's the healthcare industry in our country where whistleblowers have successfully exposed fraud in government contracts. Our healthcare system seems to be very vulnerable and needs whistleblowers to keep it honest. The second highest second worst offender, it used to be number one, but the healthcare industry overtook it, is defense contractors. So a lot of waste and corruption in that area. Those are the areas for the False Claims Act. Under the Dodd-Frank law, which Latvians are eligible to make disclosures and get bounties from, that's more the financial sector, and it tends to be the banks and investment consulting banks and those types of operations. That's where the most misconduct seems to happen, is in the financial sector, the defense sector, and the healthcare industry, in our country at least.
Can I ask a question, Tom? I was wondering, given your perspective, what do you think the reluctance is on a lot of the country's parts not to have a whistleblower bounty like we have in the False Claims Act?
Well, I'm very frustrated that there's not False Claims Act in other nations. The bounty, not having bounty provisions makes sense to me, because so many countries have, totalitarian roots where getting paid to communicate with the government wasn't an act of freedom of speech. It was an act of turning on your neighbors. And whistleblower rights are about freedom of speech. So it kind of confuses the ideals and values to have bounties. But False Claims Act is different. It's not you get paid for whispering in the government's ear like Judas or something. False Claims Act, you have to go and fight and win the battle on behalf of the taxpayers. And it's a partnership. The whistleblower and the government both are on the front lines there. I can't really see any grounds for backlash against allowing citizens to defend their country from corruption within, enfranchising them. The government just can't do it all. The False Claims Act by far is our country's most effective anti-corruption statute. And it frustrates me that it hasn't been contagious, that other countries aren't taking advantage of this. It's a far more effective model than just giving money to a whistleblower who talks to the government.
Yes, indeed. It is. Speaking from experience, it is extremely hard work for the whistleblower. It's a full-time job.
Much, Amit, also for an active discussion with Tom. Amit will be also our participant in next discussion. Vine, we definitely enjoyed your presentation, and I hope you enjoyed this session too. Pleasure to welcome in this panel 3 excellent experts. We have Evita Goša here with us today, who is legal director and management board member at Šrenk Latvija, leading builders material producer in Latvia, which employs more than 350 people and more than 500 subcontractor employees. Also, already heard, Amit Kabrawala will join us today. He is the regional resident legal advisor with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of OPDET, based at the U.S. Embassy in Riga, Latvia. He is also federal prosecutor in the international narcotics and money laundering sector. As a procurement lawyer, Katrina helps companies with fair tenders. During the discussion, we will go through the questions for each one of you, but already at the beginning, I encourage you also to jump in and comment on the things said by the other panelists. And who are the designated persons in the private and public sector to take care of whistleblowers' report? Please, Evita.
Took place today, which is Risk Management Conference, and it is interesting how these both topics, risk management and whistleblowing, go together. So I'm still thinking of the best ways really to contribute to this conference as well, and trying to do my best here today. Now, addressing your question. We probably find ourselves in a very interesting situation in Latvia. Years it was under discussion, but no parliament actually adopted it. At the same time, there are many private sector companies in Latvia which actually already their own initiatives. So currently we have a very interesting situation that this is like a we still have both types of probably people. There are still people who think that whistleblowing or reporting about like particular issues is something similar to what we saw back in the Soviet Union times, which is a bad thing to report about something. And then we have the companies and the individuals which are actually on the having a completely different understanding and actually having a very clear understanding that that this is very beneficial, you know, that there are these instruments implemented. And I am happy to be, let's say, among those who really truly believe in the benefits of whistleblowing. And I represent proudly a company which has had a mechanism of whistleblowing, and actually in a much broader understanding of this term than according to the current Latvian law we have. And so thus I'm very happy to share my experience, and also of also experience of our affiliates in different parts of the world. And we are currently, I think, in the situation in Latvia that we have to acknowledge that still, even though we have this law, of course, miracles don't happen, and we still will need definitely time really to educate the society in general, and make them understand really that let's say, what are the benefits that such whistleblowing mechanisms provide. And definitely it also involves training of people who are even capable of implementing these mechanisms. The fact itself that these mechanisms should be established according to the law doesn't mean that like automatically, you know, like everybody will be willing and capable to implement these mechanisms. So definitely, so there are different entities, like starting with Dalna, of course, and like others which are able and willing to spread this word in the society and educate those who have to implement these mechanisms, and educate these people who have to take the leading role in implementing these mechanisms. And I think that those companies and like entities in general, all kinds of organizations which understand the benefits of the whistleblowing mechanisms, they already, while really understanding these benefits, they also devote all the necessary resources for implementing them. Definitely, as I said, the main resource, I would say, is really the understanding, the knowledge, the time, and also, of course, which is what is extremely relevant, is really like creating even the atmosphere of making people believe that these instruments really work. Because as I already mentioned, the fact itself that the law prescribes that something has to be implemented, and something maybe is implemented formally, but then simply gathers dust and you know, like remains as a tool unused, it doesn't bring any benefit to anybody. So these mechanisms require actually a belief in the organization, the trust to those who actually take the leading role, and who would be actually these bodies who would review the reports, hear the cases, and if there is no trust in these organizations, then this simply won't happen. So actually, what is really relevant is to make the society in general really believe that transparency, openness, policies, procedures, that this is all relevant, and only then actually these whistleblowing mechanisms can, like internal mechanisms, can really work. So yeah, I think I can finish here. Otherwise, I will just take the floor forever.
Thank you very much, Evita, for encouraging the public, us to believe in the importance of transparency, in importance of whistleblowing. Further, Katrina, we have a system in place at the moment for whistleblowers and their protection in enterprises too, who seek the opportunities to implement their internal control systems. But anyway, we hear that there are problems and solutions for them are needed. As a legal expert from your side, what improvements to the law and the system are needed? Proposals for mitigating system shortcomings? Please, the screen is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lasma, and it's a pleasure to be here today with you. And what we're normally doing, indeed, is consulting for various companies on how to either implement a whistleblowing system, which was something that we did more than a year ago. And then what we also see is, of course, how it works. What is the day-to-day management of whistleblowing systems? And in the end, finally, how to integrate those with new understandings of GDPR laws or competition laws, etc. And what I wanted to contribute also a bit, echoing what Evita already said, and also what we heard from Swedbank, is that it is indeed or of the tone from the top, as Swedbank put it, and that is something that can be a general, not a problem with companies which have Scandinavian capital. That's in general, their compliance culture is, I would, in my opinion, incorporate these values fully into their everyday business. And I think that there are two things that we could do. First of all, the main critique that the legal community delivered after the adoption of the law was that, frankly, we're a bit lost because there was no carrots or no sticks. So yes, the companies with the employees, with employee count above 50 do have to adopt the whistleblowing system, but then what? And the company, being a corporate animal, doesn't always see the benefit. And I think that there are quite a lot of legal benefits that we could adopt just to encourage companies to take up the system. One of the most obvious benefit, which partially is already in place, for example, comes from the public procurement sector, where when a company is found guilty of violations of competition law, then they can adopt certain measures to demonstrate that these violations will unlikely to happen again. And in that system, of course, the whistleblowing procedure is something that would be very beneficial, especially if there's a cartel or another behavior that does relate to people coming together and agreeing on something that is not on paper and normally is not obvious. And so we could do that also for other things. For example, we could do that for incidences when there is a criminal violation, and we could encourage criminal sentences lower, or the specific mechanism that we do have in place for companies to be milder if, for example, there is an effective whistleblowing system in place. So more carrots would be absolutely great. And well, for the sticks, we do have those in the law. In fact, they are, from the first cases that we have, they are applied quite effectively. And here, I think the very good news is that the court system in Latvia is actually very much attuned to the values of the whistleblowing law and also to the directive that we have to implement. The first judgments that have been passed, they are very much in favor of the whistleblower, of defending them against any wrongdoing, either that was the employment case or whether that were matters regarding circulation of the information about the whistleblower between various institutions that were government institutions that were involved in review of the report. And I think that is very good because, of course, the courts do set the tone, especially when the legal consequences come for any whistleblowing report. And they are, in my opinion, quite on it, and that's good. But there are other actors, and that's maybe rather an open-ended comment that I wanted to make, especially given what is happening the last 2 days in Latvia, is that, okay, we do know that the courts are okay with this and they understand the values, and we do know that a range of companies definitely understand the values and have incorporated whistleblowing systems really since way back in 2010 when I started to practice law, and likely even before that. But what about our trade unions, and what about trade associations, and what about our political actors? And that's an open question, whether they do welcome whistleblowing, whether the tone at that top is set well, because it is in the end the lawmakers, the parliament, and the parties that make it up that would adopt any amendments to the procedures law or to the whistleblowers law, including the implementation of the directive, that do have to pass their judgment on what is whistleblowing and how can we defend the whistleblower. And even though the directive does, of course, give us a framework for what we can or can't do, I don't think that the recent events with the Attīstība party show that whistleblowing, even if it's unclear whether, even if it's not legally whistleblowing under the law, that that is not welcome behavior. And moreover, that such behavior is maybe even punished. So we do have to raise awareness, not only by the legal tools, but specifically targeting the lawmakers. And that is, I guess, the main challenge that we see at this point. And of course, more carrots for companies is always good. That will be so far that. And Laima, over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Before we go further to Amit, we already have some questions from the other sides of screen, if we may say so. I will start with one from the viewers. It is a question to Evita, whether the system is useful if about the usefulness of a reporting system in the case if it wastes time and the huge resources on so-called blank messages. Could you please comment?
Blank messages meaning that somebody simply reports just for, I don't know, for revenge purposes or something like that. Do I understand it correctly?
Yes, yes. Could you please comment?
Yeah, a very good question, actually. Yes, so really, we have had our own internal system already for more than 10 years. And honestly speaking, no, we don't experience that. Yes, from time to time, maybe there are, let's say, ungrounded reports. But in general, due to the fact that we really, for years, have promoted that culture of openness and fairness and how important it actually is, you know, that we have the same values and actually, let's say, our values and our like the principles, how we work, and the behaviors which are encouraged or on the opposite, not encouraged, are actually structured in and implemented by our code of ethics of the company. And this code of ethics is not just, again, a document that gathers dust, but really is a living instrument, which is actually an integral part of employment relationship of all the employees in the company, and is applied universally, so basically without any exceptions. And also we carry out trainings on the code of ethics, and so people can't also say, you know, that they have not understood something, and they can always ask. So we really encourage this culture of openness, and also create trust of our employees, and actually also like other stakeholders, our cooperation partners, and so forth. And we also accept anonymous reports, so that goes beyond the law we have in place in Latvia. And but we also apply really these very important principles of confidentiality, and also let's say timeliness of actually reviewing these reports, so that we really create this atmosphere of being objective and confidential and fair. And due to that, I think people like our employees and stakeholders who decide to report something, they actually see that we review these reports very carefully, and there are almost really no attempts to misuse the system. And yes, I've heard actually this question several times with respect to the like newly implemented, we can still say so, Latvian law, but at least our already long-term experience doesn't really show that this system would be misused. But again, I would like to re-emphasize that I think it is really important that we have kind of we diligently on creating this culture that actually in any case, you know, it was not like really 100% misused, you know, like misuse of the system. There were still, if it was, for instance, with respect to even like where employees are really aware that they can be like what really the values of the company are, that they would really misuse the system. I believe really in good faith of employees.
Thank you very much, Evita.
Yes, hello, colleagues. I will continue speaking in English. I would like to reflect on what the colleague said about the regulation in our whistleblowing law about internal reporting channels, that it does not really contain any carrots or some punishment in regarding the internal reporting mechanisms, which is absolutely right. I would like to therefore say that at this moment the law is open for amendments, as we all know. The amendments have been prepared by the State Chancellery in August this year, and first comments were received at that point, and further comments coming in, and we are preparing these amendments and reflecting what both private sector or NGOs or other institutions have told us. And so in this light, my idea is that if you can come up with concrete ideas, what could be these carrots or the punishment, and you can propose them in this moment, because the law amendments are about transposing the directive, so they are very broad, as the directive has this whole chapter about internal reporting. And if you see that something we didn't really see, what is in the directive, good things that we could take in Latvia, we're very open to discuss that. And maybe we should, of course, come up with some invitation on our side how to do that. But at this stage, preliminary, I can invite you to see this aspect and use this moment. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. I can see such a great cooperation in future here. Thank you very much. Now, Amit, with your experience, you definitely could tell us more about how to give those carrots, how to encourage reporting and successful utilization of internal control mechanisms. What are the challenges and best practices in your way? Please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to participate today. I'd like to thank, in particular, Delna, specifically Ines Taurina and Ines Kusche of the State Chancellery for really welcoming me to the country. I arrived here a few months ago, and I feel very settled here, in large part due to the friendships and professional friendships that I'm forming. So I want to just take a step back, and I want to talk about the importance of internal reporting mechanisms. Did you know that 43% of illegal conduct that's discovered within institutions is detected by a tip or some disclosure? That is almost 3 times the next most common detection method, which is internal audit. Compare that to a meager 2% of detection that is conducted actually by law enforcement. The vast majority of those tips come from employees. You don't have to take my word for it. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners 2020 report this year actually made that statistic based upon their research of thousands of cases. Consider that for a moment. Whether we're talking about asset misappropriation, financial statement fraud, corruption, conflicts of interest, these disclosures, or tips, as we call them, by employees were responsible for detecting misconduct within their private and public institutions. So at a minimum, the key to preventing and detecting fraud and corruption within institutions is empowering employees. Particularly, it was Mr. Ivars Edvardson, and he talked about, as did a couple of other speakers, talk about education. Education, awareness, communication, those are all essential. And when we're talking about internal points of contact, it's important, of course, that are not clear-cut, not black and white. So my background is as a prosecutor. I'm a prosecutor from New York City, and I've made a lot of cases based upon whistleblower disclosures. So I know the importance of internal whistleblowing mechanisms, and I'll talk about a few tips in a few minutes about that I have found to be useful. They're very practical, but they really stem from the idea, which may seem vague, may only be the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And there could be pervasive misconduct at a company or an institution that allegation relates to. They can help provide a roadmap of wrongdoing within an institution. They can help make sense of things that don't. I've had whistleblowers explain to me misstatements in a company's qualifications to win a tender. These things may not be relevant or apparent to the naked eye, so to speak, but to a trained person who comes from an institution, they can explain to you what a failure in a test or a quality control actually means to product safety. They can explain forgeries and alterations in documents or the creation of fake documents. They can explain irregularities in electronic accounting data. And they've also explained to me unusual payment patterns. These are all things that we cannot, as prosecutors or people from the outside, really understand without the help of whistleblowers. And it's important that we take them seriously and listen. Number 2 is very important. And whistleblowers are a special category of witnesses, really, that are oftentimes putting their personal and professional lives in peril. So you listening. Number 3, talk less and listen more. Talk established, and you can do that by being transparent, giving them updates, honoring your commitments to them, not canceling meetings at the last minute. You know, these people oftentimes, again, are putting their personal and professional lives in peril, and little things can really upset people who are in that situation. Be transparent with them. Tell them what you're thinking. Tell them at the outset about your interactions and your ability. Or trust is a two-way street. Whistleblowers, like many witnesses, may have biases or personal motivation, fullness, and the accuracy and the authenticity of what the whistleblower is saying. Corroboration is it's really case specific, but it can be in documents, it can be in emails, it can be other people. It can be shown if it can be shown that 2 or more people
witnessed or had a similar account, and there's evidence that they didn't collude with one another, their statements can be accepted as mutually corroborative accounts of the same event. So really try to investigate. And I say this to any prosecutors listening too. Tom spoke earlier today, and you might have heard a gentleman named Vladimir Radomirovic of the nonprofit journalist organization called Pištalka in Serbia. That is like really what they do. They try to corroborate the stories to support their clients. And prosecutors can learn a lot from that. In fact, Vladimir teaches prosecutors in Serbia, and he's a journalist. He teaches prosecutors how to investigate these cases arising from whistleblower disclosures. So, look, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I will be glad to discuss some recommendations that I have. But I want to obviously give the floor back to our host.
Thank you very much, Amit. I would love to maybe ask, do you have questions for other participants of the discussion? Maybe you, Amit, have something to ask to Evita, or Evita something to ask for Katrina, or no?
Well, I actually asked the same question I asked before to Tom, if anyone heard me, which was, we have this wonderful law in the United States called the False Claims Act. And the False Claims Act, it allows for various things, but basically it's the number one way we fight corruption and financial fraud in the United States. I personally have done many of these cases, recovered the day before I left the United States, we recovered a $860 million fine against the company, criminal and civil liability together in one against the company. And that was a case that we brought under the False Claims Act. That law allows people, whistleblowers, to bring cases in the name of the government, and they do all the hard work. They investigate, they litigate, and then the government can intervene in the case and also take up part of that investigation using its civil authority. Is there a serious discussion in Europe or in Latvia to have such a provision in civil law here?
Evita, Katrina, which one of you would like to comment, please? Yes, Catherine.
Thanks, Amit, for bringing this up. I would say that is a fairly different system. Latvians would view that as a fairly different system, mainly because the government intervenes in civil cases only when there's already a judgment, and it seems, and it's final, and it seems obviously unjust. So then the prosecutor's office can intervene, asking for another ruling. But then still, it's the court who decide. But I think that very good point is about the corroboration, and there I have heard from my friends at the Corruption Bureau that they are pondering about what methods, tools they could provide for companies in Latvia to be able to corroborate internally or externally certain facts. For example, similar provisions on accounting of various dealings with foreign actors, etc., etc., and which would be very much like in the United States, and so on. Because corroboration especially in corruption cases is very difficult. For procurement, I agree with you. It's fairly easy because also in Latvia, most of the procurement processes are electronic. So, for example, in one of our cases, a client received an email from an internal whistleblower, which was because another colleague just put them in CC in an email that was shady, let's say. And then, of course, a whole internal investigation also with us involved took place. In the end, training and other measures, and it was really all in according to their internal whistleblower system, which they later even improved based on that fact. But that's because they had all the emails and everything. But for corruption, for example, it's much more difficult because we do not have to have counting on gifts of noting meetings, etc., etc. And as a general rule, of course, for companies with U.S. Capital and so on, it's different. So I think those are the tools that the companies would consider, because of course that's a cost and so on. And those are the carrots maybe that we can also offer. But government intervention, of course, would be very helpful, but normally the whistleblowers in such cases expect that it's the government who will carry the load due to their procedural and
if I understand the question correctly, it's how can you, person's identity is anonymous, for example. Well, look, if a whistleblower provides the disclosure, it's incumbent upon a company, I think, or any institution to seriously evaluate that disclosure, try to corroborate or understand. It depends on the facts of the case and facts of if the whistleblower them apprised of the case. So it really, this is the job, I think, of a contact person, and of course, it requires some training on best practices on how to do it.
If I may maybe add from our experience here, for instance, in our code of ethics, we so according to it, first of all, we allow anonymous reports, because in any case, like all kinds of information might turn out to be very useful and actually also based on an anonymous report, you know, like some misconduct can be established, but we also in the text even of the code of ethics, we actually encourage people to disclose their identities exactly because, you know, in case we need additional information, you know, which might be actually sometimes even decisive for establishment of some kind of misconduct, then so we encourage to do that. But in any case, we review all kinds of reports, including anonymous reports. So this is completely true that, of course, if you need further cooperation to find out more details, then of course identity is relevant.
Well, thank you very much. Time for our discussion really ran out unnoticed. It was a real pleasure, and I'm really glad that we were able to find a good steps, a good carrots, how to support whistleblowers for them so that they really could feel like heroes and not to be afraid to talk. Therefore, thank you very much for participating in this discussion. Thank you. Un liels paldies arī visiem mūsu klausītājiem, dalībniekiem par dalību šīs dienas konferencē, par dalīšanos pieredzē un vērtīgajiem padomiem, kā arī darbu, kas jau paveikts un tiks paveikts nākotnē, lai veicinātu uzņēmumu un iestāžu izpratni par to, ka trauksmes celšana ir pašu labā un ka trauksmes cēlējiem tiešām jājūtas kā varonim, kurš tiek atbalstīts, aizsargāts, nevis iebiedēts un nosodīts par savu darbību. Noslēdzam arī konferenci Trauksmes celšana nākotnes līmenis, kas jebkurā gadījumā turpinās dzīvot kā visiem pieejamā ierakstā, sagatavotajā ziņojumā par konferencē izskanējošajām atziņām. Šīs 2 dienas ir bijušas tiešām piepildītas un noteikti būs lielisks pamats arī tālākiem darbiem pie sistēmas skaidrošanas un uzlabošanas. Arī 2. dienu iesākām jau agri no rīta ar konferences atbalstītāju uzrunām. Sabiedrības par atklātību dēlna direktori mūs aicināja izzināt labāko praksi un sadarboties atbilstoši iekšējās trauksmes celšanas sistēmu ieviešanā. Viņa ekscelence ASV vēstnieks Latvijas Republikā Džons Leslijs Kārvēls uzsvēra trauksmes celšanas nozīmi korupcijas mazināšanā. Savukārt viņa ekscelence Nīderlandes vēstnieks Latvijas Republikā Hovers Jan Bildevro mudināja sargāt likumu varu un uzticēties tai. Pirmo sesiju mēs iesākām ar pieredzējušā eksperta Hansa Grūta prezentāciju, stiprinot mūsu izpratni par to, cik būtiski, lai integritātes sistēma atbilst ētiskās līderības standartiem un cik morāli sarežģīti izaicinoši dažreiz ir pieņemtie lēmumi. Turpinājām ar Serbijas pētnieciskā žurnālistiskas izdevuma Pištaļka dibinātāja un galvenā redaktora stāstu. Uzklausot vienlaikus gan smeldzīgu, gan iedvesmojošu stāstu par trauksmes cēlējiem. Varējām ieskatīties tajā, cik tieši nozīmīgu lēmumu trauksmes cēlējs pieņem un ko varam kā sabiedrība darīt, lai atbalstītu pārkāpumu atklāšanu. Pirmās sesijas noslēgumā Ines Tauriņa prezentēja monitoringa ziņojumu par iekšējo trauksmes celšanas sistēmu ieviešanu, iezīmējot arī nianses, ka publiskajā sektorā ziņošanas sistēmas kvalitātes uzsvers nereti ir uz saņemto ziņojumu skaitu, savukārt privātajā sektorā uz darbinieku informēšanu un iedrošināšanu. Tāpēc, turpinot otro sesiju, veltījām tieši ieguvumiem un nosacījumiem, ieviešot iekšējās trauksmes celšanas sistēmas. Transparency International Lietuvas nodaļas vadītājs Sergejs Muravjovs līdzās vadlīniju juridiskā atbalsta aizsardzības un labi apmācītu speciālistu nodrošināšanai mūs aicināja arī domāt par empātijas nozīmi. Rīgas domas birokrātijas apkarošanas centra pārstāvs Aigars Evartsons uzsvēra un iepazīstināja mūs ar Rīgas domas ieviesto iekšējo kontrolas sistēmu nozīmi un trauksmes cēlēju aizsardzības nodrošināšanu tajā. Valsts kancelei un valsts administrācijas skola, klausoties diskusiju, jau apņēmās organizēt apmācības kontaktpersonām, lai nodrošinātu vienotu izpratni un pieeju trauksmes celšanā. Otrās sesijas noslēgumā iepazināmies ar finanšu sektoru stāstu. Sarmīta Žēbe no Svetbanka uzsvēra, ka trauksmes cēlējs ir varonis un cik svarīgi ir tas, ka to pasaka iestādes, uzņēmumu vadītājs. Privātā sektora pieredzē varējām redzēt, cik būtiska ir trauksmes celšana tieši pašam uzņēmumam, tā augsto darbības standartu un reputācijas pasargāšanai. Dienas pirmo pusi noslēdz ekspertu valsts kancelejas pārstāvs Ines Kušķis un DPD Latvija pārstāvs Mariks Lapiņs diskusiju, kurā viņas akcentēja jau iepriekšējās sarunās dzirdēto un uzrunāja visus uzsverot mācību nozīmi, kā arī paskaidroja šī brīža pieeja anonīmajiem ziņojumiem Latvijā. Otro dienas pusi mēs iesākām ar satricinošu, emocionālu un satraucošu Pēra Ingves Monsenes stāstu. Sīmens Kurmja piedzīvojumiem trauksmes celšanas laikā, dzīve pēc tam un darba vietas sabiedrības attieksmi pret trauksmes cēlēju. Neskatoties uz notikušo, Pērs Ingves Monsens jau vajadzēs ziņos vēlreiz, jo vienreiz trauksmes cēlējs ir vienmēr trauksmes cēlējs. Igaunijas Express Media pētnieciskais žurnālists Mārtiņš Laine pastāstīja par to, cik izaicinoši un dažbrīd smagi ir bijis aizstāvēt trauksmes cēlēju par krāpniecību zinātniskās pētniecības jomā. Uzsvēra to, cik liela nozīme ir kultūrai un mūsu izpratnei par vērtībām. Tikām aicināt nebaidīties uzzināt, ka kaut kas noticis ne tā, bet gan baidīties, kas notiks, ja tas netiks novērsts. Pieredzes bagātais trauksmes cēlēju atbalstītājs Toms Devains mūs aicināja stiprināt līderību, radīt iekšējās trauksmes celšanas sistēmas, kas nosaka skaidru ziņošanu un stiprina labākos ziņošanas principus un standartus. Noslēgumā uzklausījām 3 ekspertu Evits Gošs, Katrīns Pļaviņs un Amita Kabrau Valas viedokļus par nākotnes izaicinājumiem un iespējām trauksmes cēlējiem. Tika uzsvērta galvenā resursa zināšana un izpratnes nepieciešamība, tāpat tikām aicināt ticēt caurspīdīgumam un ne tikai meklējām veidu, kā likumos piedāvāt burkānus, bet jau pamanījām nākotnes sadarbību šajā virzienā. Šīs bijušas tiešām piepildītas dienas, un tādas tās nevarētu būt bez mūsu atbalstītājiem ASV vēstniecības Latvijā, Nīderlandes vēstniecības Latvijā un Pasaules Brīvo Latviešu apvienības. Diena bagāta, un lai gan konferencei Trauksmes celšana nākamais līmenis šī ir noslēdzošā, iedvesma zināšanas un izpratne par trauksmes celšanas sistēmu, tās mehānismiem un varonību, ko uzņems trauksmes cēlējs, būs ar mums arī pēc tās skatoties konferences brīv pieejamo video ierakstu, saņemot konferences ziņojumu un turpinot runāt un darīt, lai trauksmes celšanas sistēma Latvijā un visā pasaulē tiešām sasniegtu nākamo līmeni. Paldies jums, sargāsim sevi, būsim drošībā un vienlaikus veicināsim mūsu visu drošību neklusējot un atbalstot tos, kuri ir izvēlējušies neklusēt. Paldies un uz redzēšanos!